Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this session, which I hope you'll all agree, if you have come across Food Poverty Alliances before, are one of the greatest successes that I personally feel to come out of the Food Power programme. And this session is all about how to build a Food Poverty Alliance from the emergency response, which we've just seen over the past year, to a long-term partnership. And we've got two great speakers here this afternoon. Emily from Shropshire, who have been established since 2018, so a longer term established alliance, who's going to tell us about their experiences, and a relatively new alliance established with an action plan in 2021. But first off, we really want to find out what it is you're hoping to get from the session. So I'm going to hand over to Simon, who's going to dazzle us with his technology and ask you to answer this question: what are you hoping to get out of today's session? And I'm hoping if you type it in, is that right, Simon? Will you explain how this one works? Okay, over to you, Simon. Okay, so
thanks everybody. Sorry, my sound's dipping in and out, but hopefully it's okay. Just want you to go to that link at menti.com, type in the code 24780355, and then you'll come to this question that I'm sharing. Just to get a sense of why you've all come to today's session. So hopefully, if you start typing in, it should appear on that screen I'm sharing.
So I'm hoping everybody managed to hear Simon then. Yeah, his sound's a bit, somebody heard you. So you need to go to that www.menti.com and you'll be prompted for the code 24780355. If you put that in, you'll come to this screen and then you can type.
Maybe, Sam, it's best if you don't mind just talking through what's popping up.
Sure, absolutely. So yeah, we've got some entries in here. So looking for advice and how to link to other existing work taking place locally. How can food alliances be sustainable? So best practice on how to create a food poverty alliance and how this fits in with food poverty strategies. How to establish an alliance, an overview of what alliances are doing across the country, practical advice, examples of how existing alliances have approached this. Yes, so lots of stuff about advice, networking, finding out from other people's examples, good ideas and pitfalls to avoid. Yes, I like that one. How to become more sustainable seems to be a bit of a theme. How to link it to the agroecological approach. Yes, there you go, another one. Move away from emergency food and surplus food use. Yeah, more about learning from alliances and how they can involve, how to involve people. Yeah. Looking at how we can maximise customer income and provide food pathways not dependent on food banks. So that's another thread which sort of harks back to pre-emergency food provision, which is all about making a money first approach, more about learning from each other. Yeah, how are we doing there? Are we still getting they still coming in, Simon? Young citizenship, yeah.
Great, Sam. And I'm not expecting Rachel and Emily to be able to cover all of these things, but it's really useful for us just to also stock take on where everyone's at with this, because as Sam said, it's a big part of food power, so it'd be great to think about what you've all put in here afterwards.
Yeah, successful stories. So yeah, I mean, I've seen 3 sort of strands. One is learning from each other, how to keep alliances going, how to build alliances, what's the best practice, learning from each other. The other one is this moving forward from an emergency into a sustainable, into a more sustainable place, which includes things like money first approaches, but also agroecology practices and oh, are we? Yes, yeah, moving away from that emergency food model. Okay, I think do we still? Yep, brilliant. Thank you very much, people. That's fantastic, and it's fantastic to know what people are really, yeah, thinking right now, because obviously we're sort of coming into a post-pandemic situation, and all of us are looking forward and trying to. I know we certainly are trying to remember where we were and what our approach was, and whether it is still useful, and reassessing what the future looks like. So that's great. So I first off would like to introduce you to Rachel. She is District Food Poverty Alliance. They were established pre-pandemic, but have just published their action plan in February 2021. Very new, relatively new alliance, situated or based with public health. I think her city council would like to say that it encompasses city, coast and countryside. Is that right, Rachel? Over to you.
Hi, I'm just going to share my screen with a bit of luck. You will be able to see my slides.
Actually, can I just interrupt you, Rachel, just to remind people to keep their microphones off, and something I forgot to mention, which is if you have any questions, we'll pick up on them after the speakers. So if you pop them into the chat or hold fire and pop them in there at some point, that would be great. Thank you. Sorry, Rachel.
Okay, no problem. No problem. No, that's great. So my name is Rachel Tyrell Smith. I am Public Health Project Coordinator at Lancaster City Council. I coordinate the Lancaster District Food Poverty Alliance, and I'm going to kind of go through our timeline as well as some of the kind of strengths and challenges that we've kind of had along the way. So bear with me with that one. So I said we're a relatively new alliance, but our first meeting actually took place 3 years ago with 4 partners around the table. This came about because one of my colleagues, my boss, attended a Sustainable Food Places refresh event and happened to be sat at a table with some of the local emergency food providers, and kind of, you're from the council, so what are we going to do about this kind of situation? So the alliance kind of first met, and there was these 4 partners, and they really widened the group and kind of got the momentum going with some advice from other local food poverty alliance, so in particular Blackburn with Darwin, and also Greater Manchester. And they were able to apply for some food power development funding, which has really helped along the way. The first thing that they did was start to look at some priority areas based on an assessment report, which was carried out by a pro bono researcher from one of our local universities. But really, I think the main bulk of the work started when an alliance coordinator was hired. So that's myself, on a kind of one day per week basis in November 2019. And at that point, my primary role within the Food Poverty Alliance was really to kind of start getting the ball rolling on an action plan and pulling that together. So in December 2019, we held some prioritisation workshops. and really basing that on that assessment report that we already have. And it was all going well, but was quite lacking in the voice of lived experience. That didn't really carry through. So we were on track for a summer 2020 launch. We started to use the food stories tools, leapfrog tools, to carry out some, get some voices of lived experience through. And then, of course, we all know what happened, and lockdown, what we now call lockdown number 1, hit, throwing kind of everything and the timeline into the air. So I don't need to tell you about how the emergency food distribution was impacted. We all know that the demand rose with people self-isolating, those on furlough and losing their jobs now finding themselves in need. And what we did was we increased the number of meetings we had in place. So we used to have monthly meetings, and we are back to that now, but we are on a kind of half-hour meetings just to touch base between the different organisations. And at this point, we'd grown to more than 16 members. And once the kind of systems were in place and developed, we had some collaborations occurring, and we started to look again at the action plan. And through the course of this time, we decided that we kind of needed to start from scratch again. So much had happened during the pandemic and the COVID period that a lot of the statistics we had in place in particular, too much had changed. So we pulled a completely separate draft together just before Christmas and launched a final version, an online event in February this year. So while that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of our timeline, you're probably more interested in the how we did it. And so I'll spend some time looking at the strengths and challenges of that. So first of all, kind of the priority setting. The first point of call really was the food power, developing food poverty action plans guidance. It's just the best starting point and full of so much practical advice and guidance, and particularly being in contact with Simon as well. His help and support throughout the setup phase was excellent. Really finding out what the statistics are in your local area is a great starting point, and building a picture of what's going on using data sets that are already readily available is kind of perfect. For this, we developed a local poverty profile, and so the focus was not solely relating to food poverty, but wider health inequalities, which forms part of my work within the local council, and poverty in general. So really getting more buy-in into demonstrating what that bigger picture and what the bigger impact is. And for this, really noting the geography for where you're doing this for. So we've had lots of interest kind of wider, but I was doing this for our district level. So for context, the Lancaster district, so our city council footprint covers Lancaster city itself, Morecambe, up to Carnforth and the rural communities kind of surrounding. And overall at district level, we're fairly average on most statistics. However, we have pockets of very high affluence areas and pockets of deprivation, particularly around the west end of Morecambe, for instance, and some of the inner city areas of Lancaster. So for us, mapping statistics that are at lower geography levels, so preferably ward or LSOA, really gives us a good idea of where to focus efforts, because as I say, on a district level, it kind of looks okay. We did some work mapping out organisations and services to get the right people around the table, and ensuring that we had the voice of lived experience. So making actions relatable and real to those who are engaged in the process is really important to us. So some of the strengths, working towards a common goal and having that bigger picture in sight, and knowing that there's strength in numbers is really effective. We know that there was already a lot of activity going on in our locality, and lots going on in the background, going on unnoticed, and we really wanted to make sure that, you know, that was kind of cohesively mapped. And that the Alliance has helped partners to understand each other's services and really strengthen those links. Never underestimate the knowledge and insight that people can offer. So asking for input and feedback from partners throughout the development of the plan, for instance. and really being transparent and open about the process. So we have a Microsoft Teams group where all the documents are available to view and comment on, and all of our Alliance members have access to that and can also email, and there's lots of different ways of getting in touch. COVID-19 has actually been a strength in that it has brought more partners around the table and has allowed for more collaboration and particularly more sharing of resources. We've had collaborations between groups that I don't think we would have had collaborations between prior to the pandemic. It's just really brought different groups together and really kind of bringing together their strengths and being able to apply for funding streams and things like that. And it's really, the pandemic really brought food poverty and health inequalities to the forefront and into people's minds. So these issues were all here before, but there's now more awareness. So how do we capitalize on those opportunities? And the strong relationships have been built over time with even in this challenging time. So of course, COVID-19, as well as the strength for us, was also a huge challenge. In terms of developing the Food Poverty Alliance, and particularly the action plan, we had a lot of hold-ups, and plans for finishing the action plan have been delayed because efforts for emergency provision, obviously our time has been spent elsewhere, and rightfully so. We planned on having a grand launch event, all of that kind of stuff. Eventually we went online and just kind of bit the bullet and got it out there. Technology, although great, the process of discussing plans, hosting meetings, gaining feedback is all more challenging online. We definitely, we had some prioritization events where we back at old school post-it notes, etc., which it did feel like being in the same room was really kind of beneficial for those kinds of activities. That has been more challenging and not as easy as in person. It's one of the challenges is not to underestimate the amount of time developing an alliance and action plan takes, even without the kind of COVID in the way. It pays to take time to find out and understand what the needs and opportunities are in the local area. As I've said, for us, we have very differing communities and pockets of deprivation and things like that. So getting out into those communities and finding out what the issues are and how they might be actioned on is really important. And also this comes in line with managing expectations, so having patience and belief in the process. To start with, we certainly met with some suspicion, particularly around the council involvement. I say the council. Having said this, buy-in from the council was also important here. So I am a council officer, and I've always been clear within my role as coordinator of the Alliance that it's not a council document, and the ownership of the action plan document lies with the Alliance and it lies with the community. And it's not although it was council led in the way that it was written, it isn't a council document. And therefore the different organisations really take ownership of that. Community wealth building is one of our council key priorities. And so the work clearly falls within that remit, which helps from my end. Don't expect everyone to agree with each other. We have had our fair share of conflict. Diplomacy skills have come in very helpful on a few occasions, and also not to worry if some people resist. We found it, like, to take part, we found it was helpful to have one-to-one conversations. Quite often there was a few myths, a bit of hearsay as to what was going on within the Alliance or generally other groups, and to just kind of have conversations and dispel that was really, really helpful. And we're certainly seeing much more interest now that the action plan is out in the world. So there's some amazing collective projects starting up, which has spiked interest, and we're hoping to get more people on board from now on, and continue the conversations about what Alliance membership means. So at the minute, the structure of the meetings is something that our new co-chairs are going to look at, because we keep having conversations about what the expectations of partners are and how we continue engagement at the same time as pushing the agenda forward. How do we bring new people into the fold, and what does that look like? And I wouldn't say that we're there yet, but it's something that we're definitely interested in exploring different ways of working. So I just wanted to.
I'm gonna jump in and
okay.
Sort of, time is slipping
almost done.
Good. Thank
so
you.
Just wanted to share some details of our action plan. One of the things that we really tried to do is keep the word count down. So the full plan is 22 pages, but we developed a 1-page summary to have something easy and quick to access. We also had some infographics designed to illustrate main points. And it's great to be able to bring together things that show the bigger picture. So it's the sum of the efforts across the district. So not only showing the food banks saw a spike in demand, but also food clubs had an increase and the like. One of the things that I do want to mention is that we're taking a focus on our second action point at the moment, which is developing a food support pathway. We're doing this with a food ladders approach in mind. So this is the work by Dr. Megan Blake at Sheffield University. And we've pulled together a complementary document to outline this at the local level. And we're really hoping that that'll help to get people on board and engaged. And it really helps to kind of move forward from the catching through to capacity building and self-organized community change. And we want to look at widening the partner network, increasing collaboration and reducing duplication. In terms of next steps, we've got new co-chairs in place that started last month. So they're really taking action as to what we're going to be doing. We're looking at further engagement and taking the time to reflect on progress that we've made. So we're celebrating what we've achieved and planning out what we're going to do next. And we'll continue our strong links with the wider food partnership. In Lancaster, the Food Poverty Alliance is one of 5 subgroups forming the Food Futures Network, which is our sustainable food partnership. And we make sure that we create links between those groups where we can. So just thanks to all our members and supporters at the point of publication, these were involved. We've generated much more interest, and we've got a distribution list of over 50 individuals now, including food banks, food clubs, community settings, education, Poverty Truth Commission, etc. And happy to talk to anyone who wants to know more details. Sorry that overran.
That's okay. We'll make it up. I'll speak fast. Thank you so much, Rachel. Fantastic slides and a fantastic journey. If you have any questions for Rachel, then put them in the chat. We'll pick them up after our next speaker. So I'll continue quickly on to Emily Fay, who's from Shropshire Food Poverty Alliance. And Emily and the Shropshire Food Poverty Alliance have been in operation since 2018 and very much cover a rural county-wide area. So over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Sam. Can I just check everyone can hear me?
Yep.
Brilliant. So thanks, Rachel. I think what's going to be really interesting is how different our experience has been to yours. So it'd be a good comparison for people. So I just wanted to start with Shropshire, with the 2nd largest inland county. So one of our kind of key priorities is around rural food poverty. This is some mapping that we've done this year. And what it shows is that we've got pockets of people who are at risk of food poverty all over the county. And with such a large county, one of the key issues is access to services, but also access to food. On this map, you can see the circles are the food banks. They're quite distributed across the county, but we can't say the same for supermarkets, particularly supermarkets that sell low-cost food. We've done a piece of research this year looking at rural food insecurity, and this is the cost of an average basket of 20 food and essential items. So we looked at really standard items that you buy around food, but also like nappies. And what we found was the difference was, the cheapest shop, if you could get there, would be about £18.50 for that parcel of food. But if you were in a very rural area like Clun, you're looking at £43. And if you do live in Clun, you have to travel to the neighbouring county to access the job centre. So you're looking at 30 miles to get to the job centre, 20 miles to get to a budget supermarket. If you need access to, a hospital, it's a similar distance. If you need to get to college, you're also travelling a really long way. So there's just loads of structural inequalities in rural areas. So we formed our alliance in 2018, and our original alliance was these sort of organisations here. So we had the university, Citizens Advice Shropshire, Age UK, Shropshire Council, the NHS, we had the Diocese of Hereford, we had food banks, and I actually work for Shrewsbury Food Hub, which is a food waste charity. And we've acted as coordinators for the Alliance for 3 years. So what I want to do is just take you through our kind of journey over 3 years and then talk about our key learning in terms of building an alliance. So in our first year, we carried out absolutely loads of participatory research. So we ran workshops, we did online surveys, we did interviews with people with lived experience to really understand what was happening in their lives. And we mapped food insecurity across the county to really understand the problem and to look at what kind of solutions would work in Shropshire. So we published our Food Poverty Action Plan in 2018. We also had funding to help people maximise their incomes. So we launched the Shropshire Larder website, which brings together lots of advice for people on low incomes in Shropshire around how they can access a food bank, where they can get low cost food, how they can eat well on a budget, how they can get help with benefits and housing and all the related issues. So it's just a really great resource. And in our first year, we had 3 days a week funding for one person. At the end of that year, we couldn't identify any more funding. So we had a break for 3 months where it was just really uncertain what was going to happen with the Alliance. And you'll see this becomes a bit of a theme in my presentation. So in our second year, we didn't identify any funding until April. And that's when our local county council agreed to fund a coordination post for 1 year, 3 days a week. And that money came from public health, and it created a really good link for us into the Health and Wellbeing Board, which was really important kind of strategically for us. We also got funding from a local foundation to trial grassroots community food projects. And we worked with 4 local grassroots food projects really intensively. We ran community meetings. We wanted to learn what local people wanted and how we could set up sustainable food projects. And they were all around cooking and sharing food. So we ran, for example, one was in a primary school where we kind of formed a collaboration between the WI, who came in to teach these cookery sessions for primary school children. And we produced toolkits from all of those projects to kind of share the learning. We also had some funding from Sustain to evaluate our alliance working and to promote Healthy Start. And we started looking at a project around access to children's food. Now, in that year, we had funding for 1.2 members of staff, and we kind of reached overcapacity. We had more money for projects. We didn't have enough staffing, which caused a real problem for us. And some of these projects ended up going into 2020, and even we've only finished them in 2021. So again, at the end of that year, we couldn't identify any further funding. And we had a meeting in February 2020 where it was agreed as an alliance that there was no more funding identified and we would actually wind down our alliance. And that would have been it. I think you know what happened because, I'll just show you this first. These are some of the toolkits that we put together because we really feel it's important to share the learning that we've gathered from these projects. And they're all on our website. So at the beginning of the third year, COVID came along, and all of a sudden the council found funding to coordinate the alliance. So at that point, they gave us 2 years worth of funding for 3 days a week. I think at the beginning of March 2020, there was a real urgency around food poverty. And so the council's funding was really welcome, but that was really around dealing with the emergency around COVID. And there were real priorities around ensuring people had access to food. I think what was really great for us is that because we'd spent 2 years developing relationships, it meant that we knew the right people at the beginning of COVID, and we were able to set up really good meetings in those first few months to coordinate, making sure that people were accessing shielding parcels, making sure that, you know, children in schools were receiving those vouchers, and really just joining things together. A lot of things changed for us in 2020. So one is that we had access to grants. So we started to administer grants for food banks and food projects. We also received lots of pallets of food from DEFRA. So Sophie, who I think is on this call, spent a lot of time coordinating that and making sure that the food got out to food banks. We also had funding by UNICEF to ensure that food banks were able to give out fresh fruits and vegetables, which has been really, really welcomed by people in our community. COVID also meant that organisations really started working together much more closely. And I think for us as an alliance, it opened a lot of doors. So when COVID came along, our local council started a social task force to really look at how we could rebuild post-COVID. And we've been really involved in those discussions, both through a hardship group, but also through a community infrastructure group. We also became a board member of our local voluntary sector community association, which means that we've formed much closer relationships across the kind of decision-making structure in Shropshire. We've also had opportunities to do more partnership working. So I've been involved with a project with Public Health and Leeds University. We did a survey of all school children in the county around their access to food and well-being. And we also got funding via the Shaping Places for Healthier Lives stream, which is public health funding again. And we have been, we've been researching food insecurity in rural Shropshire, which has been fantastic. And we're about to put in a funding bid for 3 years worth of funding to do that further. We also formed a food bank network. So we now run a monthly meeting of food banks, which has been really great to bring them together and problem solve and work on issues like the way that the homeless people are treated in the county, and also sort of issues that food banks are facing, like the attitudes of local councils and parish councils to their work. We also thought it was really important to work on communications in the last year. So we updated the Shropshire Larder website, and we spent a lot of time on social media trying to encourage people to come forward for the various forms of support out there. So this year we had staffing of 1.8 full-time equivalent.
Emily, I'm just going to ask you to start wrapping up if that's okay.
Okay, can I just briefly run through my learning? 1 minute.
Absolutely, go for it.
Brilliant. So our learning is host organisation makes a big difference. I think, you know, there are real benefits in being part of the community, but if you're part of a small organisation, there's going to be challenges in that there isn't the finance to kind of keep you going. Relationship building takes a long time. It's taken us sort of 3 years to really build those relationships. Be careful in your communications. So we keep it really factual. We share people's lived experience. You need to be aware of local politics, because if you communicate in the wrong way, you'll turn people off. And funding is always going to be a challenge, and managing that thing around capacity.
Thank you, Emily. Sorry to rush you there at the end. I just want to leave a little space for some questions for you and Rachel. So I have a couple of questions. If anybody has any more, pop them into the chat. So the first question is, it's around the legally constitutional, or the constitution of the Food Poverty Alliances. So are they legally constituted? How does your membership, do you have terms of reference? Do you, how do you manage that? I think Rachel briefly touched on membership actually a bit earlier.
Yeah, I can briefly answer that in that we do have terms of reference. They are being revised kind of at the minute as we've got some new co-chairs in place. And we have had lots of conversations about what constitutes a member. And I don't think we're quite there yet in kind of figuring that out. We've had a lot of interest, but whether it's kind of individuals wanting to come in and find out about the Alliance, how we might do that a bit better than them coming to formal meetings, perhaps. As we move forward, obviously we've only just launched our action plan, relatively speaking. So, you know, how do we get actions done within the meetings? And then between the meetings to kind of move forward on things is something that we're finding challenging if we're needing to repeat kind of what's gone on multiple times going forward. So it's, yeah, I'm all ears as to what other people do actually.
Fantastic. Emily, do you have anything on that point?
Yeah, I mean, we're also unconstituted, and we're hosted by a charity which comes with its own set of complications. And there have been many discussions about whether another organisation would be a better host, or whether the future lies in being part of a larger food partnership. But it's challenging. Okay,
thank you. So another question, and Rachel, it's probably more for Emily, although I think you did touch on it also. But Emily, how have you managed relationships with your council? Are there any pros and cons to forming the Alliance externally? And I guess, yeah.
I think there are pros and cons to it. I think being outside of the council means that you have an independent voice, but actually you need to identify who has the influence and who the decision makers are. So you need to work quite intensively. I mean, with Shropshire Council, we work with teams across the council. So, you know, housing, welfare, early health, public health, and that's, you know, my experience of councils is that they're quite siloed in terms of which area they work in, and you need to work across, but you also need to engage with elected members, which is more challenging. But it depends on the structure of your area, because we also have to work with town and parish councils, because if you're looking at local community projects, that's where you need your influence. So there's a lot to think about.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, I guess you covered it from the other angle. What's your experience?
Well, similar, to be honest. Even though I'm internal to the council, we still have to kind of find out who the elected members are that we need to be talking to, all of that kind of stuff. And one of the challenges that we have from a district council level is that public health sits at county level, and we're a city council district. So it's finding out who we need to talk to at Lancaster County level as well, and what involvement and influence they had. So yeah, it's similar challenges, I guess. You know, we've got a key in because I'm a council officer, so I can have those conversations possibly more easily, but yeah, same.
Okay, so I'm going to take one more, which is for those of you that don't know, there are other alliances happening all around the country, which are called Sustainable Food Places Alliances, which focus on food sustainability more widely. And I know that a lot of the food poverty alliances have sprung up alongside or even are part of that programme. So the question is about what are the kind of links being built with other groups of the Sustainable Food Partnerships? And our approach is to food poverty changing because of these interactions. Emily?
Well, so Shropshire doesn't have a food partnership, but we've just managed to get some funding to scope out a food partnership. So we're sort of exploring with other organisations whether that is an approach that will work for Shropshire. And I think if it does, the Food Poverty Alliance will probably become part of that wider discussion, which I'm sure would change the way that we approach food poverty as well.
Great, thank you. And Rachel, does Lancaster have a Sustainable Food Places?
Yes, so we quite proudly have a Bronze Award Sustainable Food Places Partnership, Food Futures. So with the Food Poverty Alliance is kind of a separate entity, but I've been working very hard to bring those kind of groups closer together, and it is a subgroup then of the Food Futures Partnership. So there's five subgroups, and the Food Poverty Alliance is one of them. We have quarterly meetings where we pull together those different things. With my kind of health inequalities, public health hat on, I also attend a few of the other ones and try to, so there's one on community food skills, for instance, one's about the economy and the environment, and trying to kind of foster links within the council, but also kind of between each other. So if there's a project that might be able to link into the Food Poverty Alliance action plan within one of the other groups, then making sure that those kind of organizations are linked together. So Food Futures is working on their 10-year strategy at the minute, of which the action plan that I presented today feeds into that as well. So they've been doing a lot of kind of visioning exercises and things in the last couple of months. So that's coming up in the very near future.
Fantastic, thank you, Rachel. So hopefully we might have a couple more minutes at the end for some more questions, but I want to move us on to the next bit, which is back to the Mentimeter for everybody, and it's just a bit of a temperature check about where we are right now, so it's going to be two. Simon, are you ready with your? Yep, just can't hear him. So if you are able to go back to the menti.com URL, and then there's another code there, 5851499. And from what you've heard, or if you're indeed involved in an alliance in your area, what piece of advice would you give someone developing a food poverty alliance or an action plan? Some pearls of wisdom. Okay. Relationships, strong relationships are key. Engage with your local communities. Take your time, research what's already going on and understand the relationships. Good advice. Yeah, again, all about relationships, conversation, building trust, being led by lived experience. So yes, bringing people along with you. Speak to everybody. Funding is always an issue, I think. Building collaboration, strong comms. Yeah, so really about building those relationships, speaking to people in your communities, building the trust, building the collaboration, getting the right people around the table, yes, finding out what's going on, asking others, willing to share, and yeah, consider the existing relationships and the politics in your area. And yeah, so that looks, yes, to me it's looking like, yeah, take people along with you, take those people that might be experiencing food poverty or food insecurity. It's not necessarily people that are hungry, but it's also those that are just worrying where their next meal is maybe coming from. And then it's all about the relationship building in your area and understanding what's going on. And being able to be collaborative and build trust. Fantastic, thank you, Simon. And here's the second one. Do we need, no, this is on the same, isn't it? So I think you've all got access. That looks like the same code to me. Is that right, Simon? Same code?
Yes, that's right. Some people might need to refresh them.
Right. Okay, so it's the same URL, same code, but you might need to refresh your screens. And the question is, what is the one challenge you're facing now in running an alliance and or implementing your action plans? There's that word again, funding. Yes, sometimes it feels like that is the thing. Getting buy-in from senior management, sensitive political climate, getting the right people around the table. Local councils want to control everything, capacity, which I guess feeds into that funding issue. Keeping the momentum going, yes, I know that's quite a difficult thing at the moment. Is anybody that's been working in this area of food poverty for the past year will know how tiring it is and how tired they are. So turning it around and keeping the momentum and enthusiasm can be hard. Volunteers, conflicting views on how it is best to help. Yes, there is potential there for different sort of views, whether it be things like the good old one of should things be means tested or not, but yeah, difference of opinions. Capacity, volunteers, council engagement and the work required, getting everybody on the same page and shifting from the emergency response to long-term focus, bring together organisations that are already incredibly busy supporting people in their communities, COVID fatigue, yeah. Capacity. So yes, there's stuff around capacity, funding, moving forward into the future, COVID fatigue as well, how to keep that momentum going. And what was reflected from the first slide that that you answered was this getting people around the table and building that trust and collaboration, even with different viewpoints. Okay, thank you, Simon. That's fantastic. Brilliant, thank you everybody. So just before we start wrapping up, Emily, Rachel, do you have any sort of comments you'd like to pick up from the slides? So is there, I mean, for example, is there one piece of advice you'd give someone developing the Food Poverty Alliance or an action plan?
I was just looking at that there, and it just all rings true, really, doesn't it? It's that conversations and building relationships for us has been a really, really key one, and having that kind of common goal and common aim, and always trying to bring people back around to why we're here and why we're doing this, and that all of these different pockets of activity are all towards this common goal, and what we can do in the kind of masses is better than we can do kind of all individually. So that would be the main point. And I think, you know, looking at the challenges going forward, these are the same challenges that we've identified going forward. Absolutely. So just everything is ringing true. And I just think that these particular events of sharing our experiences and our knowledge with each other and finding out what everyone else is doing and how we tackle particular problems is really of benefit going forward as well. So hopefully we can continue to do that with the regional and otherwise meetups. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, I think for me, the one thing is about communication. It's a complex issue and you need to be communicating with everybody about it. Recently been building a database of everyone we've been in contact with through the Alliance, and it's over 1,000 people in Shropshire. And, you know, so you really need to think about how you're communicating to different audiences to keep them engaged on this issue, but also to share what you're doing and also to act as a kind of champion. I think there was a comment earlier about local community food projects, but a kind of champion for lots of small projects that are happening to kind of amplify what they're doing, encourage other people, take action and just to share what's happening.
Fantastic, thank you, Emily. So in the in the chat, you will be able to pick up on the action plans and the slides that both Emily and Rachel have shared. Also, those fantastic resources from Sustain, including the one to developing the Food Poverty Action Plan. Is that in there? Simon, nod your head if that's links in there. Great, good. Thank you very much for attending. If you please enjoy the rest of the week. I am going to shamelessly now plug a session I will be running later in the week, which is a regional networking event on Thursday. Look out on the notice boards for that. That will be an opportunity for anybody in the Eastern region to get together and explore issues affecting the Eastern region. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and goodbye. Simon.